In 2023, we saw a lot of good ships introduced into Star Trek Online, and, 2023 is coming to a close, so now we can start wildly speculating on what's coming for 2024. Now, I have no idea what's going to be in the anniversary bundle as of this recording, so I'm not even going to bother speculating. I know Spencer's speculating that we might be seeing Wolf 359 ships. I have no idea. Instead, this year I'm going to be talking about what legendary ships I want to see introduced into the game that still haven't been made, and hope that at least one or two end up being made next year. First up on this legendary ship wish list is going to be the Luna class. Originally, the ship had only ever been featured in the books, but has since been introduced into canon thanks to Star Trek Lower Decks. A number of Luna class ships also appeared in seasons 2 and 3 of Star Trek Picard. Now, as to why I think this ship should get a legendary version, I would think the answer to that is obvious. This was Captain Riker's ship. Now, admittedly, we don't know much about the Titan's adventures, at least within canon, but we do know that there was a Titan A. At least, there was for a short time. 'Cause names matter. Anyway, what this means is that the Titan likely did something rather extraordinary enough to earn a legacy registry number, which is not something they give out to every ship. And as for more Star Trek Online focused reasons, I'd really love to see a new version of the Luna class just because, well, I'm not big on the stats of the original one. For one, the current Tier 6 Luna class isn't even a full spec ship, only having a Lieutenant Commander command seat. But the main reason I want another version of the Luna class is because science destroyers are stupid. Science destroyers have a unique feature that allow you to alter their configuration, allowing them to change their base science vessel setup to something more tactical focused, very similar to an escort class. This is an ability you're allowed to activate in the middle of combat, and while it may sound interesting on paper, but without the ability to change your loadout along with this reconfiguration, there's no point to this ability. You're still going to be flying the exact same build. So if you had a science build set up on that science destroyer, well, that's going to work like crap now because you've lost access to your secondary deflector because it loses that in tactical mode. Alternatively, if you have a weapons-focused build and you switch over to science mode, again, that's going to work like crap now because you've lost one of your weapon slots and your experimental weapon slot. Science destroyers are stupid, so for a legendary Luna, I think they should just drop the science entirely and make it just a destroyer. Weapons-based builds are much more popular among the player base because they're very easy to put together, so I think this would be a much more popular setup for this ship. And frankly, given what we've seen the Titan do in Lower Decks, I feel like a destroyer is more faithful to the ship within canon. Alright, next on this legendary wish list, the Negvar. Honestly, it kind of surprises me that we still don't have a legendary Negvar in Star Trek Online. Well, I guess it's not super surprising, because there are only so many Klingon ships that really qualify for legendary status, and they can only release so many per year. I could definitely see why they want to stretch the release of these Klingon ships out a bit, but yeah, I'd really like to see a legendary Negvar in the coming year. I don't really have a long rant on this one like I did for the Luna. It'll probably be a battlecruiser, maybe a dreadnought. I know Augie really wants it to be a juggernaut, but that seems unlikely to me. Frankly, if they were going to do that, they probably would have done it with the Bortosk. But as long as it has a 5-3 weapons layout and isn't just some generic cruiser, I'll probably be happy with it. Next up is the Cardassian Galore class. Now, making the Galore into a legendary ship might be a bit of a stretch just because the Cardassians actually aren't a playable faction within the game, and so far every legendary ship has been part of one of the playable factions. But this is the Cardassians we're talking about. They are a huge part within Star Trek lore. Like, can you imagine Deep Space Nine without them? And the Galore is their main ship. This was their workhorse vessel. This was everything. Mostly just because, they only made like 3 different ships for the Cardassians in the shows. And one of them, the Keldon, was just the same Galore model with some extra bits tacked onto it. In fact, in STO, the Galore and Keldon are customizable with each other. So really, if there's a legendary Galore, you're getting the Keldon skin along with it. But yeah, I'm sure there are plenty of people within the player base that would appreciate some more Cardassian Space Barbie. And frankly, if you're going to be introducing a legendary Cardassian ship into a bundle, it would also be a really great excuse to finally introduce Cardassian ground weapons into the game. Next up, the California class. Star Trek Lower Decks has already finished its 4th season, and we know a 5th one is on the way, so at this point I feel like the California class has really earned its place for a legendary ship. This is another one where I really don't have a long-winded reason for wanting this one to be a legendary, beyond just me chanting Lower Decks repeatedly. Though for a new playable version of the California class, I will say, I wanted to have a 5-3 weapons layout because there's no purpose to 4-4 anymore. Not that there was much to begin with, beyond just making sure a ship wasn't too good. But I also want a California class that's a frigate, because these are supposed to be jack-of-all-trades type ships. And what says Jack of all trades in Stowe more than a bunch of universal seating? Next on the list, the Prometheus. Now, admittedly, this one's probably a bit unnecessary given that we got the Hydra in the 13th anniversary bundle, but at the same time, that wasn't a legendary ship, so it didn't have all of the old consoles and traits packed into one ship. And considering the Hydra's trait really is focused around utilizing the multi-vector assault mode, but didn't come with the original multi-vector assault mode console, I feel like that would be nice to have. I know the Hydra's console kind of had a cut-down version of multi-vector assault mode baked into it, but honestly, it's not as good as the original. But yeah, not super necessary, but I think would still be kind of nice. And a new version of the Prometheus would be a good excuse to introduce a new starship trait to further buff separation consoles like the multi-vector assault mode. Because while there's been a good amount of progress in order to make those consoles more useful, they're still not great. Next is the Nebula class, and again, this is another one that probably doesn't seem that necessary for a legendary version because we just got another version of this in the 13th anniversary bundle. This one being the Monitor. But it always bugged me that they made the Monitor into a carrier rather than a true science vessel, because that's what the original Nebula was. It was a science vessel. Really, I would love to see a Nebula variant that was made into a spearhead. Because the Nebula class is a very large ship. It's nearly as big as a Galaxy class. So I don't think it makes that much sense to utilize it as a normal science vessel. This was also a class of ship that saw combat against foes like the Klingons, the Dominion, and even the Borg. So the ship can clearly be utilized for combat, which is why I think a spearhead is a really great fit for this, so it has that extra weapon slot to fit a ship of its size and its tactical capability while still being a true science vessel. I mean, Science Dreadnought could also be an option for this ship, given its size, but I do feel like Spearhead is the better choice for it. It's also worth noting that the older consoles off the older style Nebulas actually don't work on the Monitor. And that's because those consoles are restricted to Nebula science vessels. However, the Monitor can't use those consoles because it doesn't have science vessel tags, because it's a carrier. That old Nebula console set is still very useful for a Drain build. And while Drain builds are still very niche, I feel like getting better access to these consoles would open up people to trying out Drain builds more. And frankly, a proper legendary version of this ship would actually give a reason to unbind this console set, giving further flexibility for Drain builds. Next up, the Steamrunner. Now, again, this is probably another one that seems like a bit of a stretch just because the Steamrunner has always been kind of a background ship. You never really see it in the foreground much. But at the same time, I mean, we got a legendary Akira, so why not the Steamrunner too? I like the Steamrunner. It's a really cool looking ship, and frankly, it would be nice to have one that's full spec because the current Tier 6 version only has a Lieutenant Commander command seat and Lieutenant level intel seat. No specialization mechanic. And as for the issue of what makes the Steamrunner actually qualify to be a legendary ship, well, it may have been one of those background ships you don't normally see in the foreground, mainly in First Contact and Deep Space Nine, but the ship did get quite the spotlight in the Season 4 finale of Star Trek Lower Decks. And honestly, that's reason enough for me. Heck, the Akira never even got that kind of treatment. Yes, I know the Steamrunner in Lower Decks actually isn't a Steamrunner, they gave it a different name. While it looks like a Steamrunner, they actually scaled its size down to be more in line with what you would see on a Saber class. So because of this, they ended up calling it the Saber Runner, but frankly, I think that's stupid, so I'm ignoring it. But I do still think that this is reason enough to give the Steamrunner a legendary version. And the final ship on this list is going to be the Gagarin class. This ship started life as a Star Trek Online original, which was based off of Star Trek Discovery Shepard class. But when Season 2 of Star Trek Picard started its second season, they didn't want to make the same mistake that they had made in the finale of the first season, that being the copy-paste fleet of the Inquiries. They wanted to add some variety to the amount of ships they had, but just didn't have the time and money to make a bunch of new ships. So they got Star Trek Online to provide them with a number of their models. 4 of the models that Star Trek Picard used on screen were Star Trek Online originals, thus bringing them into on-screen canon. The other 3 being the Reliant, Sutherland, and Ross class ships. Season 3 would bring even more Star Trek Online originals into Star Trek canon, including the Odyssey-class Enterprise F, but those 4 being the first 4, I think should be held to a certain esteem. Now, the Ross class is already the Legendary Galaxy, and the Reliant is a variant of the Miranda class, which also already has a Legendary. The Sutherland is a variant of the Nebula class, which doesn't have a Legendary version, but is already on this list, so that's another point to be added for that one. So why not include all 4 with the addition of the Gagarin class? Honestly, I don't really know what I would want to see in a Legendary Gagarin, because we already have 2 Tier 6 versions of the Gagarin, and while neither of them are bad, neither of them are great either. There's the original C-Store version, which is a Miracle Worker battlecruiser with a 5-3 layout, which I like, but the big thing I don't like about that one is the double Miracle Worker seating. There's also the Mirror version, which was released in an event a while after, This one was a warship, which I like, but at the same time, it also only has a 4-4 weapons layout, and it isn't full spec, only having a Lieutenant Commander command seat. So I guess the obvious solution would be to combine them. Miracle Worker warship with a 5-3 weapons layout. But lose the command seat. Miracle Worker and Command don't mix well because neither of them have unconventional systems triggers. Give it Intel or Temporal for the secondary. But yeah, Legendary Gagarin class. I think this would be cool. Oh, here's an idea. Make food cubes a year and call it the Empyrean class. So yeah, that is 8 different ships that I'm hoping get made into legendary versions in Star Trek Online, and hopefully we'll see at least a couple of those in the coming year. You know, there's 8 ships on this list. They only release so many in a year. And I actually have another list of even more ships that I want to see made into legendaries, but that one consists of ships that I don't think actually deserve it, but I still want to see anyway. That one's probably going to be the next video to go live on the channel. Anyway, let me know what ships you really want to see made into legendary versions, whether or not they were on this list. Just remember the basic rules of legendary ships. They have to have a T6 version first. If there's no T6 version of that ship, it can't have a legendary version yet. But yeah, be sure to leave that in the comments down below, and while you're down there, be sure to use all the other buttons down there, you know, like, subscribe, hit the bell, hit the join button if you want to become a member. You can find the merch store link in the subscription below, or if you're ever shopping on the Epic Game Store, be sure... Man, I cannot talk today, so I'm just going to wrap it up here. Thank you so much for watching. My name's Stu, and I will see you guys next time.